Hi there. Welcome to Gen Con TV, and this is Fireside with Peter Adkison. That's me. And my co-host, Beverly Marshall Sailing.
That's me.
Yes, it is. The purpose of our show is to talk, find stories about the people and events having to do with games. The games that you love, to go out and look for those stories. And so this particular season, we're talking about Magic the Gathering. That's right. To do that, what we're doing is we're bringing in guests that we worked with back in the day, because Beverly and I were there together back in the 90s. And we know a lot of people from those days because we all worked with them. And so our format is each week we will bring in somebody we worked with, somebody who did a lot of cool things at Magic. And
somebody who knows stuff that you probably haven't heard anybody talking about.
That's right. So our guest this show is Vince Caluori.
And this one is going to be a particularly interesting show for those of you who like to come up to us at cons and ask, how do you start a game company? How do you run a game company so that it makes money and you still get to keep running the game company? This guy is about half of that answer.
That's right. And so so Vince was my mentor in business, came in and helped me at Wizards of the Coast. So Vince Caluori, welcome to our show.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're going to have a good time.
Yes, we are. So let's first of all get to know Vince Caluori a little bit. So when before Wizards of the Coast, before Magic the Gathering, I mean, you've been around a long time. I mean,
Yeah, I'm old. Yeah. Thanks, Peter.
But you started off in aerospace.
Aerospace. I worked for 34 years at the Boeing Company.
That's right.
And it was a wonderful time. I had so many interesting assignments and management challenges, and I learned a lot there. I mean, there's no place like the Boeing Company to learn how to manage a big project.
Right. So why don't you tell our audience about a couple of the programs you worked on before we met with ALS?
Before we met, I'm primarily space new business development guy, which means that I led a team of R&D people, preliminary designers, and we would look at what problems the customers had or they thought they had, and we would do designs, and then we'd go out and try and sell it. And eventually, we were hopeful that a request for proposal would come out, and then we could bid it and win it. Now, we got really good at that. We won 41 out of 42 competitions in the space business. Mm-hmm. And we bought a lot of business to the Boeing Company in the long run.
Right. And this is mainly in the 70s and 80s?
Let's see, I started there in 62.
1962.
Wow.
And you worked on Space Shuttle, Space Station.
Dinosaur X-20, way before your time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what brought me to Seattle, was that space plane, the first space plane, the X-20, which went nowhere. It got canceled 6 months after I got to Seattle, which took me down to New Orleans to work on the Apollo program, the big rocket, Saturn. Mm-hmm. And from there, I vowed to never come back to Seattle, Peter, because it rained so much the 9 months I was here.
That's the good part.
Well, I happened to live in a really rainy spot. It was in Burien, and it just rained all the time, I think. Anyhow, they talked me into coming back here for the B-1 bomber. And after that, there was Space Shuttle, and after that, there was the C-14 short takeoff and landing cargo airplane. And then NASA Navy vertical takeoff fighter thing, and there were just so many interesting jobs.
So you might have heard that Wizards of the Coast had rocket scientists at the company, and it's true.
Yeah,
we weren't just making it up. We had rocket scientists at Wizards of the Coast.
Real rocket scientists.
Real rocket scientists at Wizards of the Coast. Okay, so let's go to 1987, I believe, is the year that I, as fresh out of college, was assigned to work in your program. And what was that program?
That program was a big program for the Air Force called the Advanced Launch System. because these, when they launched these really big satellites, and they had big satellites to launch because they were telescopes and stuff like that.
Right.
That we still don't know about really. And it was very expensive. It was very crucial that the launch systems be really reliable because these payloads that they were launching were so expensive. And so they were looking for a new way of doing business. And we needed to build some really sophisticated life cycle models. And that's why we hired you. I mean, no, what we did is we went and we said, hey, we need somebody who can write some programs for us.
Right.
They sent Peter over.
That's
What did you think of this guy?
Smart. Well, he sat right down and went to work. So I said, I was impressed. I'll tell you this, Beverly.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know the day he left. And one day I'm sitting there talking to my chief engineer, and I said, well, God damn it, Jack, get Adkison to fix that. Get him to run the model. And he looked at me sheepishly, and he says, hey, Vince, Peter's not here anymore. What do you mean, Peter? Who's going to run the model? So anyhow, it was really valuable. Peter did, as you would expect if you know Peter. He was so conscientious, did a great job. And during those years, we had that other venture with the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Norwegians to do sea launch. That was fun.
Yeah.
Not many people know about that. Taking a Ukrainian rocket out into the equator on a barge and firing it off. It's still operational, I think.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow.
that was fun.
It was fun stuff. Fun stuff. Well, what happened? So I worked for you there in that program for about 5 years, and about midway through that, in 1990, I started in 1987, worked till 93. In 1990, I didn't tell you at the time because, of course, I was nervous about doing this, but I started a game company on the side, and you found out later, called Wizards of the Coast. And a couple of our friends like John Jordan and Tom DeBursay, who worked for you at Boeing, invested in Wizards, and that was a lot of fun. And so eventually when I left, it was because the company was doing well. I ended up leaving Boeing just after we launched Magic the Gathering in 1993. And we went to Gen Con, and Magic was a big hit at Gen Con. We sold everything that we took to the show. People loved it. So I flew back to Seattle the next day, walked into Boeing, and quit my job.
Did you actually quit your job the next day?
The next day.
See, they didn't tell me.
Yeah.
Until I said, where is he?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think there was a brief period of time where I had been surplus from your program and was still working at Boeing Computing Services or something like that. But anyway, so that went about a year later. I started to get into a lot of trouble at Wizards because Magic was so successful. It was growing like a rocket and becoming it. And I was drowning. I was really confused with a lot of the types of problems I was facing. And
well, up to then, we had been really focused on just making a really good product.
Right.
And trying to figure out how do you then sustain that, and what do you do when money happens?
Yeah.
How do you spend it wisely? How do you reinvest it? Do you give it to shareholders? What do you do with it? How do you make it work?
Yeah. It was it was the business stuff. It was the challenges of running an organization, the challenges of managing money. There were people that knew words that I didn't know, like balance sheet and
annual operating plan,
asset depreciation, which I eventually went back to school for. But at a moment when I was quite forlorn about all this, I reached out to you. I think I wrote you a letter.
You wrote me a letter. I got this letter.
Back in the days, we wrote letters to people.
Peter needs help, I said to my wife at the time, who knew Peter. And she said, well, go help him. And I said, okay. That's that voice in my ear.
Right.
And so I went and sat down with Peter, and we didn't have to talk more than a few minutes for me to realize, the problems that were there, which was running a big organization. Running a big organization with a lot of functional areas is not easy because they manage they manage to confuse themselves automatically,
Right.
you know, because nobody knows what the other guy's doing. There's just a lot of problems. And talking to Peter, I had the image that came to me was that they were making money, and it was like taking the money in one bucket and running across the room because the bucket had holes in it, and trying to get as much of it over there before it ran out, because there was probably some waste there. But
Yeah.
Well,
Peter
when you
recognized
don't
it,
know what
though.
you're doing, sometimes you throw money at the problem, and hey, it works.
well,
Yeah.
Peter knew the
right.
best thing about Peter was he knew he had a problem.
Mm-hmm.
The worst thing would have been if he was sitting there thinking everything's going great.
Mm-hmm.
So anyhow, I still had a big job at the Boeing company, and
But you joined our board of directors.
I was the board.
You were the board of directors.
I was the only one on the board.
It
and,
wasn't an employee.
and I would go in
Yeah.
and I would spend time with Peter about various subjects. It was kind of fun, although he worked for me, or in my he never worked for me, but he worked in this big organization I ran, and I knew him. I knew he was just a good guy, and
Yeah, we didn't hang out at Boeing.
we didn't hang out.
You were 4 levels of management above me. It was somebody.
but I knew what you were doing.
Well, and and I always, and the reason I reached out to you is I had so much respect for you as a leader, even though we didn't have a lot of face time at Boeing. I can still remember these all hands meetings.
Yeah.
And we were in.
Is that why we had so many all hands
That's
meetings?
why we had
Oh.
all hands meetings.
That's the way you communicate with the people.
And yeah, we'd have this big, it was a big,
bay.
huge bay
Yeah.
room. It just rows and rows and rows of desks.
200 people sitting
Yeah,
there.
200 people sit in a big room, most of them smoking.
Yeah, in those days.
And, I was working for a retired Air Force colonel named Jim Hagan.
Oh,
We'll
my
talk
God,
about
yeah.
a tough guy to
A
have
hard
as your
ass.
first supervisor. But, he was great. I loved. We got along great. But we would have these all hands. You would organize an all hands meeting, and you would literally climb up and stand on a desk.
Stand on a desk.
Mm-hmm.
Stand on a desk, and you'd tell us what was going on. And it was always so authentic. It was always from the heart. I remember once, you were saying, now we just won a proposal. We won some big job.
Yeah.
And you said, now everybody call your wives, because let's face it, it was all men in those days. And call your wives.
We hadn't won it. We were wanting to win it, and we had a big proposal coming up.
Yeah,
And I
and-
remember standing up on the desk, and I said, guys, go home tonight, tell your wife that they're not going to see you for 6 months. You're mine. I said, because we're behind, and the company's counting on us to win this,
Right.
And
Yeah. But for some reason, you had this knack where everybody was like, okay,
Yeah.
sounds great, let's do it.
I know. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah,
No, I know. It was,
Yeah, it was.
I never didn't tell everybody the truth.
Right. Right.
That was
Right.
one thing, because I never wanted anybody to lie to me.
Right.
And I always treated everybody the way I wanted to be treated, which is the secret to success, really. It's management is simple, Treat everybody like you want to be treated, right?
Yeah. It's a variation on the golden rule. Right.
I don't know what's
The golden rule: do unto others as you
do
want
unto
them
others,
to
yes,
do unto
exactly.
you. Right.
Yeah, it is the golden rule, yeah.
It is the golden rule.
So, those people needed to hear directly, not through the rumor mill, what was going on and what was the strategy and how were we going to win? How were we going to do good? So later on at Wizards of the Coast, I have to tell a story.
Yeah.
Peter and I did, as Beverly said, we had all hands meetings.
Right.
And in the line of being really straight with all of the people, Peter and I did this little act. And we'd stand next to each other on the stage, and I'd say, Peter, what are the latest rumors that are going around?
Rumors?
And that was our way of dealing with the talk that goes around in a big company. There's always rumors, and he'd say, well, you know, I heard, I was in the men's room and I heard somebody say, and then so I would answer, and then I'd raise a rumor with Peter, because we kind of knew. We had people who would tell us what was going on.
We have Monica.
We had Monica.
Well, and you could just look at the company interweb and have the all hands
Yeah.
folder where everybody
Yeah.
would
Right.
bring up
Exactly.
stuff.
Beverly.
So.
There were a lot of clues, and that was just our way of, you know, there's nothing worse in an organization. There's just a whole bunch of rumors going around, none of which are
Right.
probably true.
Right.
And all of them creating people having not the best feelings for
Right.
continue
Right.
to produce goods. So
Right.
So were there
That was
other
fun.
specific practices that you took from Boeing to Wizards?
Oh my goodness, yes. More than from Boeing. It was from doing proposals and winning. And the other day, Peter and I had a laugh because we spoke a little bit before this here about no unsubstantiated claims.
Right.
You know, if you're wanting a job, you know, and you go in and say, listen, I am the best person in the world for this job, and you can't substantiate that claim, the person who listens to that just gets put off.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with this guy. He's just BSing me. And that would happen when you're writing a new business proposal too. But you know, I worked for some wonderful managers at Boeing, some of the smartest guys I ever met. I mean, I think they were smarter than me, maybe.
I worked with a lot of smarter people than me too.
That's the
thank
goal,
goodness.
right? That's the dream. You want to work for people who are
I
smarter
remember
than you.
when this
Exactly.
one guy, I don't know if he's still alive, but he was, talk about somebody I always looked up to and copied was Mark Miller, who
Yeah.
ended up
I
being,
remember you talking a lot about Mark Miller.
being president of the company, really smart guy. And,
President of Boeing.
yeah, and he came down to New Orleans as chief engineer. And he brought these two really good guys in, and they came in and they made us draw an information flow diagram for the engineering department. And since I was doing configuration management at the time, I was right in the center of the flow. And you know what that was, you know, let's track the paper through the system, because who's using all this paper?
Right. Right.
And when you do this flow, you find out what jobs people were doing and what was necessary. Where did it go? And what did they do with it? You wrote that report? Well, who got it?
Right.
And what did they do with it? And that was so valuable.
Yeah, because it's really easy for a report to be identified as necessary in a company and get started.
Exactly.
But whoever stops the report?
Nobody.
Right. They just more and more reports
Goes
compile
on
for the
forever.
company, and then
you spend all your time writing reports and not actually
So-
doing things.
So,
Right.
so you know, one of the things I did when I got to Wizards, not when I got to, there were a lot of things I did when I got to Wizards, but later
we're getting
on,
to that. We're still in the board of directors era.
When
Sorry, did I throw you off there?
no, after I was there for a while, I realized, you know, we should do that. And we in the executive suite, we took an entire giant wall, and we had a representative from each organization, a worker, not a manager, because managers, anyhow, it was better to have a worker. And they put up every block, every piece of work. If you were doing some work, something had to come out of it. What was it that came out?
Right.
And where did it go?
Right.
And what did they do with it? And my God, you know, we found out so many interesting things, didn't we?
That
And,
you let me in there, even though I was a manager.
So
I did,
this is
yeah.
You let me in.
So this was I saw you do that at Boeing, and so when you came into Wizards, so let's jump forward to you,
Yeah.
you
Okay.
joining Wizards. So you joined the Wizards board about a year after Magic came
Yeah.
out. So we were, Magic was growing like crazy. We had great sets that had come out, Arabian Nights and
Yeah.
Antiquities and Legends, and we were really doing well. And then in the end of 1994, beginning in 1995, we came out with a set called Fallen Empires. And Fallen Empires presented, you know, sort of the big, the first great crisis of Magic the Gathering. It was that we printed too much, and in other words, our printing capacity, our manufacturing capacity finally caught up with the demand. But there was a lot of artificially inflated demand. So when we actually released as much Magic as people ordered, it ended up just about crashing the company. And I think it was about this time that that I called you and joined our board of directors, and came in and helped us work on all sorts of problems in the company going after that. And I think I tried to get you to come work full time almost right away, but you were still working at the Boeing company.
I was doing two things, Peter. I was working at the Boeing company in an exciting job, and ski racing. I was a cross-country ski racer. Those two things. So I worked out and I worked. I was busy, but
So
I was intrigued with this
Right.
hobby game, because I don't like the games, but I love the hobbies, and I was a hobbyist myself, and so.
Yeah, and you're a hobby. You've always been a model airplane builder, right?
I've been a model airplane builder all my life, and I still do, and I still fly once a week indoors.
You go fly. So you build these planes and you fly them.
Yeah, indoor acrobatics. It's
Nice.
an international sport,
Wow.
which hardly anybody knows about, but it's quite something.
So in 1997
Yeah.
is when we eventually got you to Wizards of the Coast full time.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that transition
Well,
there.
At that time, I was not the only outside director on the board. We had two other gentlemen, both, about my age at that time, and a lot of experience on boards of directors. One of them was on the board of Starbucks.
Arnie Prentice, yeah.
And we had a financial wizard, so it was really, we had a good thing. And Peter came in one board meeting, and he said, we have to buy Dungeons and Dragons. And we said, why? Now, at the time, I think we were making about $50 million a year,
Yeah.
total business, which is,
It was a little
not
north of
huge.
that, but yeah.
It was
Yeah,
in
it's-
less than 100.
Yeah.
And we said, no, you guys are just barely managing what you got. You can't take on another company. And Peter had proposed not only taking on the other company, which is in Wisconsin, but moving it to Renton.
To Seattle, yeah.
And moving all those people. And we said, that's the board guy said, that's a disaster back then. No way, Peter, you can't do that. You don't have enough management strength in the organization to do that. You guys can manage what you got. And so this, and Peter said, but if I don't buy them now, they'll go bankrupt. And if they go bankrupt, we'll lose all the shelf space, because Dungeons and Dragons is a book business.
Yeah.
And we said, no, well, that's not our problem. That's whoever's running Dungeons and Dragons. And but he persisted, and finally, Arnie Prentice turns to me and he says, Vince, he says, you're nothing but a ski bum. By then I had retired from Boeing. I just retired
You
that
had just
year.
retired from Boeing.
And, I was going to Europe to do races. And he said, you're nothing but a ski bum. Why don't you give these guys a break and go to work for a year just to help them over the hump? And I said, listen, I leave in 2 days, 3 races in Europe. And, talk to me when I get back. Anyway, when I got back, Peter called me up, and Peter has a good way about himself, but and he says, hey, listen, I really need you. I'm going to give you this much money, which was an attractive salary. It wasn't exorbitant, but it was good. And he said, but this is the selling point. He says, I'll give you 7 weeks of vacation a year so you can do this damn ski racing that you want to do so bad. And I thought about that, and I said, no, and then you got to build me a gym.
Yes.
I need a gym so I can work out at lunch and after hours. So he said, okay. I said, okay, I'll do it for a year, which turned into, 7 or something.
Yeah.
And that was and it was easy to say yes to Peter, because I'm, I have now done some mentoringship and sitting and talk. I knew we had common values.
Yes.
We were never going to fight about what was the right thing to do. And because one of the things he and I worked on during that early days when I was the only board member and his mentor was a compensation plan.
Yes.
And we sat there and we said, we have to give the people a piece of the action.
Right.
Well, we did.
Yes. We did.
You want to explain how you did that?
Well,
Because not everybody knows what you gave us.
well, we wrote a formula that said, a profit sharing plan. And it turned out that it was the year the year that Hasbro bought us, which was a big year for profits. And
it was it was worked really well.
it was worked well. And so when you ran the formula, basically what we ended up giving every employee was another year's salary.
Yeah.
We gave them whatever they got paid that year, they got another year's worth of it.
Yeah.
And my gosh, I love that.
Yes.
And you love that. Beverly loved it. We all,
Yeah,
everybody loved it.
We did well that year.
I had people write me and saying, hey, it's the first time I've been able to get out of debt. And I thought, whoa, I didn't realize, this was a really, we
Yeah,
did something
yeah,
good. And
Well, and we also we also awarded equity in the form of stock options. to all
Yeah, I
of
was
our
going to say,
employees.
even before that, there were stock options.
we
Yeah,
gave
yeah,
stock
yeah.
options. A lot of people didn't understand about stock options. And I can remember one all-hands meeting, I gave a presentation about what they might be worth.
Right.
And I said, look, the way these stocks trade, now we can't trade ours yet, but if we go public, then they'll be able to trade them, or if somebody buys us. And I talked to them about a 15-to-1 price to earnings ratio, and I said, look at our earnings now. If we went out at 15-to-1, your stock could be worth like $1,200, $1,300 a share.
Right.
Everybody looked again. Well, how many shares do I have? And that turned out to be true.
Yeah.
Because
We didn't go public, but we ended up selling the
Well,
company, and
Right.
When you
and
sell
it was
the
it
company,
was a great deal for
yeah.
all concerned, but all parties.
Everybody worked at Wizards, particularly the early people, because Peter, being the generous soul he was, gave 1 share of stock for 1 hour of work in the early days.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. And,
Well, it's interesting because I had, a couple of times I had to talk to people who had invested cash in the company about how dilutive all of our equity stock options were. Because
You want to explain what dilutive means?
Yes, because thank you. By diluting the value, like if you have, if you own 50% of the company, let's say, and the company decides to issue a bunch of stock to employees and increase the size of the pool and double the size of the pool, say, but you don't get any of that stock, well, you went from owning 50% of the company to owning 25% of the company.
Right.
That's called dilution. And over the years, we kept adding, issuing more and more stock options to employees, and of course, we gave a lot of options to Richard because he, of course, Magic, was that was the most important thing that had happened at Wizard of the Coast, and he ended up being the largest shareholder of the company, and that was great. But it was, and I remember telling this investor, who I will remain nameless, so like, I really appreciate the investment you made back in the day, but this whole company, in terms of cash investments, Wizard of the Coast, for RPG, for the role-playing games that we did, and Magic the Gathering, we raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000 to $300,000, and we managed to do all that. This is a company worth tens of millions of dollars. Right. And that value, that extra value, is all the employees that built this company.
Yeah.
That seed capital got us started, but really, I always looked at Wizard of the Coast as a company that was primarily built by the employees of the company.
Yeah, there's no question that was true.
On the back of Magic the Gathering, thanks to Richard. Yeah.
Magic the Gathering, the goose that laid the golden egg.
Yes.
I used to tell people that no matter what we do, when we talk about new ventures with the company, whatever we do, we don't do anything to damage Magic, because it was underlying financial strength that we had. It never got gigantic, but it was a steady, big business.
Pretty big
Well, big business.
Big for gaming, yeah.
Yeah, big for
Big
tabletop
for
gaming.
gaming.
Yeah,
So,
and it's continued to do well, and it's bigger now than it's ever
I
been.
know.
Yeah,
Isn't that something?
That's
Well, and it
incredible.
also was what let us take risks and do things like, save Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
Right.
We shouldn't have sold it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I know. I'm happy we sold it.
I'm happy we sold it.
We made a lot of people. That was a payday for a lot of people.
But,
and, I was running. I was getting bored then.
I mean, so. See, for me, it was never boring because it was always new people, new management challenges.
Yeah.
Now Peter and I had a great relationship because it was, and this goes to management too. I'll talk about that. I said, Peter, I don't like these games. I don't play them. I said, you love these games. You play them. Everybody in the gaming community knows you. You're the face of the company. So you be the face of the company. I'm never going outside the building. You work with the R&D guys on what's coming down the line. So you plant all the seeds, and you let me reap the crop.
That's right. That was the thing. I planted the seeds, and you.
So we had that clear
harvest.
delineation, and we never stepped on each other's toes.
No, we never did.
It was really easy for us to decide together on any big initiative because, we knew what each other was talking about, and
our offices were right by each other.
Right next to each other, and we had one common Monica.
Yeah, we had our assistant.
One assistant.
We had an open. We both had open door policy.
Yeah, that's
we both
for
kept
sure.
our doors open. You could walk in and talk to us at any time.
Anybody
and
could.
we walked in and talked to each other. I think well, speaking for myself, I just enjoyed our time together.
Yeah, we had fun.
It was fun to go in and talk to you, and I could say anything to you, and you could say anything to me. We did.
We had fun because the business was good.
Yeah.
We were making money for the company. I mean, we had great employees. They seemed to be happy.
Yeah.
We were happy.
So going back to the moment when you joined in
Yeah.
1997, on the eve of acquiring TSR, you joined the company. We were really struggling in terms of being. You're generous before saying that we were running the company okay. I mean, we were really struggling I was struggling to run this company well, and I asked you to come in so that help me run the company, but also because I knew that buying TSR was going to take a lot of my time. I went out to Lake Geneva and spent several months out there, and not just doing the deal, but then after the deal, getting to know that everybody. So, how do you walk into a company and settle in as the chief operating officer, the person in charge really running the company now?
Executive VP.
Yeah.
Peter's executive. And, that's a good question, Peter. When I said yes, I never had thought about what I would, I just assumed, okay.
You didn't come in with like a list of things you had to fix.
No, I approached it like any other big proposal, let's figure out what the problem is. I had my suspicions because,
Don't mention names.
No.
Although bringing up the management team was something that you spent a lot of time with the first couple of years you were there.
It was an interesting group of people at Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah.
For the most part, very young. I think if somebody was 35, they were a graybeard there. And of course, I had to worry about this suit from Boeing. That's the way they used to think about. Peter's bringing in a suit. From
We also called you the gray matter.
The gray matter. Well,
Because you had gray hair.
So I went to work, man. My first day at work, it was in a pair of old Levi's with tears in them and a sweatshirt. Mm-hmm. And in fact, some of the people that met me on that first day thought I was somebody's dad visiting the company. They didn't know who I was. They found out soon enough, but
maybe one of the first things you noticed is that maybe we shouldn't have a company where somebody's dad would wander around unescorted, and nobody would say anything.
And nobody said, "Hey, you, what do you do?" But no, So my strength was in running an organization and make it all go, and achieving a goal with the organization. You know, having a team that was focused on what had to be done and would get it done. Now, we were so lucky because the way we treated people, they were dedicated. You know, the parking lot was full 9, 10 o'clock at night. People would, you know, they did whatever we asked them for, I think, because they knew we were looking out for them.
Yeah, I never went down to the office and it'd be empty.
No,
you could go
never,
down there
never.
2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and there'd be people working.
Yeah. So,
HR once asked me to tell one of the R&D guys that he had to go home,
yeah,
like occasionally, so that we wouldn't get in trouble for zoning.
they used to sleep there.
Yeah, exactly, because he was
Yeah,
sleeping there and he
yeah.
was
That
showering in the
same
gym. And
shower. Well,
they were
not the-
asking about, could we have laundry services?
I was talking about the barefoot at the urinals, but that was another
Yeah.
thing. I'd say, hey, listen, you cannot use urinal barefoot.
Health code.
Elsewhere.
Yeah, that was the one of the few dress code requirements was you cannot violate state health laws.
Yes.
But so when you first come in, you know, the first thing I had to do is, you know, I had to see who were the people who were reporting to me and what did I inherit? You know, I didn't know, you know,
Everybody,
who they were, what their skills were, and you know, you know, I'm going to treat myself now as just a first-line manager. You know, I come in, I'm the boss of this organization, and you know, my responsibility was to take all those people, make sure they succeeded if they could. So I had to go out and meet them and see, A, you know, were they smart enough? 2, did they have the skills and knowledge to do the job they were in? Was that the right job? Did we divide the organization correctly in a functional way so that it would work good? And so I spent a lot of time, not a lot of time, but probably 6 weeks figuring out who was worth keeping and who wasn't. I hate to say it that way, but
Well, it's
Problems
not
will be
necessarily
started
who
at the
was worth
top.
keeping as a person, but who was the right person for this job.
right, could I make them successful?
Right.
You know, and that's your job. You know, every manager's job is take the people who are assigned to him, and you are responsible for making them successful. You know, you have to make sure they have the right skills, the right knowledge, and that they're in the right job. Because if you can make everybody successful, then you're going to be successful. But so that was, you know, that was the first thing. And gee, you find out so many interesting things if you walk around. And you know, and what I did is I never invited anybody to my office. I walked around and went and sat down in their office and say, you know, how are things going? Oh, the other thing I did, I just drove some people nuts because we'd have monthly reviews or weeklies. I don't know.
Yeah.
There was something going on there.
There was a
already.
weekly staff meeting.
Weekly staff meeting, but then
Right.
you spend time with each group. And the first time I did it, they had all these view foils, you know.
Yeah, back in the days of view foils
Yeah, and I
with
said,
overhead projectors.
They said,
Was
"Well,
it really that far
what
back?
would you like in these meetings? You know, because I was the new guy. What would you like?" And I said, "I'll tell you what. I said I would like to see the data you use to manage your organization."
Right.
Well, there were people got really upset with that. They said, "What's he talking about?" You can't manage something you don't measure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to measure the management. So that was the data, you know. If it was the sales team, how are sales going, you know, or whatever. But, you know, yeah, show me your data. Well, that upset everybody, you know. Just tell us what you want. So I didn't do them anymore, as a matter of fact.
Right.
They were a waste of time.
So you did a lot of work on the team, you know, getting the right people into the right jobs. I remember once you told me keep the org chart in pencil.
Yes. I
We sure
remember
did that.
It's just the current deployment of forces.
It's the current deployment of forces. It's exactly right, Peter. That's so
Yeah.
good you remember that stuff.
But these things were big revelations for me. you know.
Peter,
It was-
Peter promised me that he was going to write a book about all of the smart things I said.
yes, called Vinceisms.
And he used to keep track of them. And he said, "Well, I'm putting that in the book." And I said, "Well, good."
I know. I was.
glop. I talked to Pete about glop when we were doing strategic planning, and I said, hey, don't give me any glop. He said, what do you mean glop?
Guap. Yeah.
Guap, whatever. Guap, not glop.
Okay, somebody has to explain what that
Well,
is.
guap meant goals without plans.
Okay.
Because, my look at it was, hey, you can write all the goals you want down. If you can't figure out how you're going to do it, which is the plan, then we're not putting that goal up on the wall.
Right.
And there were just some simple little things like that I introduced to the company. It was not earth-shattering, but it was a discipline.
Well, I remember
that
you.
was missing.
I remember you coming in and doing this strategic planning session with all the executives, and it was the goals, and no guap, goals without plans. So we had to have goals, and then we had to write out what all of our plans were to support these goals, and all the tasks had to have the name on it of who was going to make sure that we did this task, right? And you said, now when we're done with this, if your name's not up on the board, you're fired.
You don't have a job.
You don't have a job here.
You're not part of the plan.
You're not part of the plan. And boy, that made people nervous.
It was a lot of fun stuff like that.
But of course, everybody ended up having their name on the board.
I want to talk about one other thing I thought
Sure.
was really interesting from a management standpoint
Yeah.
that kind of comes from the airplane business, which was systems engineering. I don't think I called it systems engineering, but when with any big, whether it's a live piece of machinery like an organization or an airplane, you break it down functionally. You do production, you do editing, you do marketing, you do sales, and that's great, but there are things that have to happen that fall between those groups. And they often don't happen very well. It's kind of like on an airplane,
You mean like communication between the groups, or understanding?
Who's responsible? Who's going to do that? Who's going
Right.
to make that decision? It's like doing trade studies in the rocket business. You had to have some group who would compare these two options, because Group A, the flight controls guy, wanted this, and Group B, the structures guy, wanted this. And there had to be a compromise, and that had to be somebody else doing that job. And so, as I looked at Wizards in this pure organizational sense, I started that group. What did we call that?
Which group?
Kelly's group, Eskridge's group.
Right. Project management.
No, it was not budget.
And,
It was,
Yeah. But it was a project It was sort
a
of
project management group.
It's
Yeah.
where the
And,
project managers lived.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
and they, what we did with them is we assigned all of the things that didn't fit in anybody else's job. And that was, to me, that was systems engineering, how the organization worked. And that worked, that was so helpful.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and I think you started with the question of how do we make these cards anyway?
Yeah, well,
Taking it back to Magic, right?
yeah,
Right.
starting from the very beginning.
Let's start with
yeah.
the Golden Goose, Magic the Gathering. We're making our business is selling these cards.
Yeah.
How do we make these cards? Turned out to be a pretty complex.
Extremely complex.
It was more complex in the reality of it. Once we documented everything, and you got everything up on the wall, and all the Post-it notes, and who was doing
colored
what,
arrows
all
and
the
the
arrows,
boxes
it
and-
looked like one of those
Scissor points.
It looked like a crime thing.
Crime scene, yeah.
Crime scene. It looked like a crime scene. It also looked like how you figure out
A crime scene with flowcharts.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was more to it than anybody realized. But
Yeah.
that was a.
I mean, when you looked at that process from, the beginning, when, the R&D guys decided on what power of cards they needed for, mathematically
Theme for a set, yeah.
to work good, and then, how they were going to implement that, what was the new notion and how that fit in, that was one process. But then, you had art,
Right.
you had to print them, you had to package them. Packaging was no small deal because
No, packaging was
we
no small deal.
guaranteed one good card in every pack. That was fun to go watch happen. I mean, I learned something about printing there. Well, of course, we had a master printer
Yeah. Yeah.
who
Well, we started with Carta Monday, and we maxed out all their capacity, and ended up adding American printers. By the time, by the time we left, the Wizards, because later we had Pokemon to deal with too. Well, we were using all the printers of playing cards in the world.
So to add to that story, we were using most of the printing card capacity of the world. We were upsetting some of the casinos because we were the only other business that used the same kind of card stock they did, which was a gambling card stock. Well, because Magic was, we had
from the beginning,
play.
it was like, Richard and I were always like, we want these cards to shuffle and feel as well as playing cards. These got to feel like casino cards.
And had the black liner in them so you couldn't see through them.
Which turned out to be great as an anti-counterfeiting thing later.
Yeah.
Right. So that was
that paper was, in short supply, and we about ran the printers out of that paper, and the casinos couldn't buy it anymore. You know how they throw cards away,
Right.
They play with the deck, it's just gone. But so they use a lot of cards too. That was kind of fun. We had so many interesting things happen with Magic.
That part where you sat us down and worked out the process, that was pretty much the thing that you did that I noticed most directly as somebody whose job was completely about the product and making the product. Because there were so many things that were happening that I didn't know that that were happening at the same time that my group was doing its thing, and there were ways we could relate to each other that
it was great.
We really hadn't thought of.
That's
it was really good work.
Because I always thought you knew everything that was going on.
Well, I knew everything was going on in my patch.
We have a few minutes left. I'm going to see if Kristen has any questions have come in from our audience.
Yeah, we have a few. So our first question is, if we want you guys to talk about the retail locations of Wizards of the Coast. Tell us a little bit more about that.
The retail locations was the game stores.
Oh yeah. That's the same guy that started organized play for us.
Rick Ahrens.
And he said, I think we could. He was such a brilliant marketing guy.
Yeah.
Now he's just a slum landlord, I think.
No. He's running the Pokemon company.
Oh, is he? Oh, I thought he was just buying buildings and renting them out.
He does that on the side. Yeah, Rick Ahrens. Yeah.
Anyhow,
So he
said, we should open a store. And he had this notion.
With Steve Connor, by the way, my business partner, who we interviewed last week. Steve was remember Steve Connor was on this retail initiative too.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, worked for Rick. So anyway,
Rick, it started with Rick having the notion of a third place. People need a third place to go. And he says a great example of that is Crossroads Mall in Bellevue. Which was a different mall than any of the other malls around. It didn't have all of the big name, stores there, but it had a great food court, and it had a grocery store. It was just a different. It had a magazine shop, a used bookstore.
Well, it had that giant chess set.
And a giant chess set. And Rick says, we need to open a store in that. And we did, and just started making a lot of money because now we were collecting 100%. You know what I mean?
The margin.
We were getting full retail.
So instead of we could sell a Magic card for for a booster pack for $3, say, instead of selling it for 70 cents or whatever.
Well, and then Rick took and extended that.
Yeah.
You remember when we made Toys R Us do special events on Saturday mornings? Toys R Us was always on the verge of bankruptcy, and of course now they are. But their CEO, Michael, who was a wonderful person, used to call me up once a week and say, Vince, you got to give me more cards, more Magic cards. They're like gold,
Yeah.
And I said, well, I can only give you so many. I mean, we're not giving any to Walmart. You're getting a lot. And Rick says, let's make them do special events on Saturday mornings. And we did. So it was all part of his notion of a third place. And that led to us letting it get out of control because we hired some retail guys.
Well, we ended up opening something like I think, over 50 Wizards of the Coast stores.
Mm-hmm.
And then we acquired Gamekeeper, which brought us another 75 or so stores. And
Temporary stores, Christmas time.
And extra stores at Christmas time.
Yeah.
So we had over 100 stores as part of the deal. And but I don't think at the end of the day it was what Hasbro was really valued about our company.
Well, the problem with that, Peter, is they had put the book value of the stores on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
And, when I said, look, I got to get rid of these stores, they said, no, you can't, because we're going to have to take this giant write-off. That's how that business thing works.
Yeah.
So I had to suffer with
But
that.
but I think the point. Back to this question. I think that Wizards of the Coast was a real leader in sort of pointing the way to what our vision was for organized play of stores that had really good lighting, had a good place to play, would sell Magic. We worked with retailers on figuring out a good formula for how to sell, like do tournaments with limited, like booster drafts and sealed deck tournaments where players would buy cards for that tournament. So it turned the process of running tournaments in the stores into something that worked for the retailers. And even though Wizards got out of the retail business, by the time it was okay because the retailer, the independent game stores had gone that direction, and now they've taken it to another level. You have places now like really high-end, like our game center was in the U District, where it's a retail environment where with a bar and a restaurant and running events of all sorts.
It's like we had to be retailers before we could figure out how to support retailers,
Yeah. I'm really proud of what we did.
Oh, the stores were terrific. It's just we had terrible leases. That was the only thing that hurt it. We went into the high-end malls, and
But that became Hasbro's problem. Do you have another question, Chris?
We do. So, tell us about if you have any insight into the production of the original Magic the Gathering novels. How did that come about?
Original Magic the Gathering novels. I think that was before your time.
Before my time.
Yeah. I could say a little bit about. Do you remember much, or do you want to say something about that?
There might be an interview later where we would go into that in more detail, but.
Yeah. But we had just briefly. I don't want to ignore the question. We had we very soon after coming out with Magic, we started to take the idea of this being a world. Who are the characters? Starting stories, and so we started to. The first couple of sets, our flavor text on the cards was quotes from fiction and stuff like that, which was a lot of fun. But at some point, we said, okay, each set is going to have a story associated with it. And I remember the first guy that we worked with on this was Bill Fawcett. And Bill Fawcett, who's famous in the world of fiction, he came and explained to us the idea of a book packager, which we didn't know anything about the business of selling books. And he helped us package for, I have to admit, I don't remember if it was Random House or HarperCollins. I think it was HarperCollins. The first novel, and that eventually turned into a line of novels, and that's kind of how it started.
Sounds like we'll hear more later.
Yeah, I think we'll have to take that as a
vote for that topic.
A vote for that topic. Yes.
Lastly, tell us about the development of organized play.
Development of organized play. You want to say anything?
Well, I will never forget the board meeting.
That's a good story.
Talk about that.
Yes, tell us.
Rick Ahrens, was, he had this notion that, and he's so right, that you had to have you can't have just a game. You needed a meta game around any game. And he said the meta game around Magic, because it's such a great strategic game, is we're going to have organized play, and we're going to have professional players, and we're going to pay them big prize money. So he presented this, and we said, well, Rick, how much money do you need? And, he named this outrageous sum. And we said,
It's the $1 Million Pro Tour.
It was $1 million.
I mean,
that
was cash
Right.
giving out as prizes at tournaments. To say nothing of the cost of administering all these tournaments.
We had a huge organization, travel bills.
Right.
It was a big deal,
Yeah.
but it worked.
It worked great.
It worked. I remember handing out
Well-
those $26,000 checks to some kid,
Right.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It was a big deal. And as I look back at it, it's part of the meta game. It's the game it's a bigger game than just the one. And although I didn't, wasn't keen on all these card games, I was a hobbyist, and I understood that metagame is just much bigger, and I thought, wow, this is great,
Well, and that was really big, I think, for achieving one of the goals we had originally for Magic, which was about bringing people together to, physically play a game together from all sorts of different places. I mean, this is part of how it went international.
Yeah. And it was, I mentioned the moment when I reached out to you to have you join the board, ask you to join the board, was when this was just happening. We had when Fallen Empires came out, and the Magic market crashed. It had a bit of a crash. It didn't crash totally crash the way people were predicting it would.
Just too many cards.
But it did have a bubble effect, and it came down about 20 or 30% on volume after that set. And we were in the situation of what do we do about this? And it was, Rick and Scaff, Elias, and Richard, and the brain trust of those R&D guys who were saying, listen, we've been coddling the collectors, the speculators. We need to get out in front of this and talk about Magic as an intellectual sport. It's the game and the competitions. And the organized play became a thing for us to talk about and reposition the brand of what Magic the Gathering was, from a collectible primarily to a sport, an intellectual sport. And that was, I think it was, for me, so many things went right at Wizards through some creative, like Richard having inventing Magic in the first place, or us having the opportunity to do Pokemon. Those are eureka ideas or a good fortune. The organized play program to me felt like us being smart, and I'm really proud of that. I mean, I think it was
brilliant.
It was one of the smartest things that we did.
It's why Magic is still so strong today. Because that metagame makes a difference.
It was the right thing. So.
It's Magic was so. The reason we got Pokemon was because of Magic.
Yes. So, all right. Well, I think this seems like a good place to leave it. Our hour is up.
I'm not done. I have more stories.
I know you do. Maybe we'll have you back.
No, that's it.
That's it.
One trip to Seattle's enough from the country.
All right, so thank you for joining us. We are going to be taking a couple of weeks off. We have, I've got some travel I got to do, so we won't have a show next Wednesday or the Wednesday after that. So the next show that we will do 3 weeks from now will be, our guest will be Darla Kinnerud, who used to work in your department, right?
She worked for me, and then she became me when I left.
That's right. So
is she still there now?
No, but
yep. So please come back and meet Darla and hear more stories about
I can
Magic
guarantee you
Gathering.
the editors have all the good dirt.
There you go. All right.
See you next week. Next time.